Okay, how's everybody doing today? My name is Akash. I'm going to teach you a little bit about Xcode today. I remember when I first started making apps for iOS, I was really overwhelmed by how much Xcode could do. So I'm going to make a video that I wish I had, which was an explainer to Xcode. So this will be basically an introduction to Xcode, just basics, just to get you kind of familiarized. And this video will be for people who are literally just getting started. You have a Mac, you want to start iOS development, you got Xcode. Now, where do you actually start? And what does Xcode or coding in Xcode entail, and how do you make an app, right? So first things first, you can download Xcode from the Mac App Store. But after you get that, that's the point where we're going to start. So let's get into it right now. Alrighty, so first things first, I'm just going to open Xcode. And when you open it, you'll find this. You'll find like some other, if you have previous projects, you'll see them here. And then you'll have three options: Playground, Xcode project, or clone an existing project. We're just going to do create new Xcode project. And that, a little bit an explanation of that would be that getting started, a playground is just a place where you can write some code to basically test it out. It's kind of like literally a playground for code. A project is where you can make an app. It literally says create an app for iPhone, iPad, iMac, etc. So that's most of what you're going to be doing. So let's do create a new project. And I'm going to drag this in here. And so we have several options here. It says choose a template for your new project. Most of the time you'll be doing single view application. And by the way, you can make a lot of these by just doing single view application and add them on later. So it's not like you lose anything. Yeah, this is for iOS. You can use watch, TV, Mac, and cross-platform as well. But for now, we're just going to do iOS, and we're going to do single view application. I would highly suggest you just start with that for now, especially if you're a beginner. You can dive into these, which is really great too, later on. But single view application, we do next. And here we're just going to fill out some information. And by the way, this is asked every time you make a new project. So product name, that's the name of the application. You can, again, change this later, but we'll just do, for now, Xcode intro. Alrighty, the team, we can talk about teams later, but teams are, for now, I believe you should have like Akash, or sorry, that's my name. You can have your personal team on there. And then when you purchase a Apple developer license, you can like rename your team, or you'll have it there as well. But for now, you should have like a personal team or like your own team that comes default with Xcode. So organization name, organization identifier, these aren't too important. This organization name can be the same as your team name, and your organization identifier can be com dot and then your organization name. Language, Swift or Objective-C, we're going to use Swift. User interface, Swift UI versus storyboard. Swift UI is basically, I guess you don't have to worry about it too much right now, but Swift UI is a new way of making user interfaces. Storyboards are another way. It's with a framework called UIKit. So we'll start with storyboard today, but we'll dive into Swift UI later too. But for now, we'll use storyboards. These checkboxes, you don't have to worry about them for now, but these are just simple add-ons that you can add on later too. Alright, so let's click next, and here it just asks you to save it wherever you want. I'm just going to save it in my desktop. So we create it, and it opens up our application. So let me expand this and explain this a little bit. Okay, so first things first, it opens up to our project settings, and this stuff you'll mess with when you submit an application to the App Store and stuff like that. But there's a few key things that you'll notice. So in identity right here, you'll see the display name. This is literally how or what displays underneath the app icon when you actually install it on a device, when you install the app you're making on a device. This bundle identifier is a unique identifier. So if you change this, or if you make another app with the same one, you're gonna have some issues. So just make sure this is, once you have it, once it's made, don't change it, don't mess with it. If you need to mess with it, you'll probably know that you have to. Deployment information. This is probably, I mess with this a lot. So basically one thing is device orientation, right? So if you're making an app that you have to look at it landscape, then you're only going to do landscape left and landscape right. This literally means that this is basically asking you, hey, can your app be used with your phone turned, to to the side or not. So in this case, let's make it not do that. So we'll just turn off that. We'll only do portrait, which means the normal way of looking at your iPhone. So with like if you had a if you had a home button that would be closest to you. That's what this means, so the portrait one. And pretty much outside of that, also you'll notice in the App Store sometimes when apps have an iOS version requirement, where does that come from? It comes from right here. So if you want your app to be used by iOS 8, then or people or users that have a phone that's on iOS 8, you can do that. If you want it to be on the latest one, you can do that. For now, let's just put it on 13. And then right here is if you want to be able, if you want your app to be used on iPad or Mac. Right now we don't, so let's just check off the iPad one and just keep the iPhone one. Cool. So now that's just general settings. I feel like a lot of that, what I just explained, you'll use that most of the time, or it's quite important. Moving on, we'll get into this panel right here. So actually, to be fair, I don't know the official names of each of these panels, but in all honesty, it's not really important, as long as you know what they actually do or what to do with them. Okay, so next thing, we are going to go on to explain this panel right here. This left panel is the file hierarchy. So it's all your files put together, your whole project right here. For the most part, you can pretty much just focus on this file right here, the file or the folder that is the same name as your project. You can pretty much ignore the products one. And you can also pretty much ignore, for now, the app delegate and the scene delegate. These things we'll dive into later, but what you can basically know about them is that they are files that control more upper or higher level things about the application, how it actually interacts with the operating system and things like that. It's actually like, it's really not complicated at all, but at least for like really easy apps and getting to know Xcode, it's really not that important. One of the things that is very important though is the main.storyboard. So this storyboard, this is a file called storyboard. It's a .storyboard file, and what it does is this is where you actually create the user interface of the app, literally how it looks, where each screen goes, and stuff like that. This is where you create it, and this is, this is how you're going to create what users do, how it looks. So for example, you can literally drag in more screens, and you can drag in, let's say, a button and stuff like that. So that's how you do it there. So the main.storyboard, very important. You can actually make more of these files, and you don't just have to have one, but main.storyboard, that's where you're going to be doing a lot of your UI stuff. So each of these guys, and this is something that bothered me for so long, or it wasn't clear when I was learning initially, but each of these rectangles, these storyboards, or these are called views or view controllers, each of these actually has to have an associated class. Now, if you've never done anything in computer science, or you haven't done anything in that area, that'll sound a bit ambiguous to you, but I guess I'm hoping that whoever is watching this video has a little bit of a computer science background, and if not, I'll probably make videos in the future explaining this kind of stuff, but for now, I'll just assume you do. So this thing will have a class, and that class you typically will assign it in a view controller or a Swift file, basically, and you can see we've made a class here, or the project comes with a class here. And this class, see, it's view controller, it's actually assigned to, if I click right here and go over here, it says class view controller. So I might be going a little fast here, but I'll go back to explain it. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, you create files or Swift files, and you create classes, and each class or one class corresponds to one view controller. It can be, you can have a view controller with, or every view controller can have one class, but one class can have many view controllers, but we'll explain that later. On a basic level, each rectangle here, this thing will have an associated class with it, okay? And you don't have to, but typically every class is kept in its own file, right? Not a rule at all. You can make multiple, but just for, organization's sake. So this file called viewcontroller.swift has the class viewcontroller, right? So that makes sense. Cool. And going on with this example, if I made another viewcontroller right here, or this another rectangle, I would have another file, right? Okay, so let's go on to assets. Assets is basically, I guess it's a little self-explanatory. It's where you keep all your images. So if I wanted more images, I would, right-click right here. I would do import, and I would import some images, right? Cool. So launch screen is very similar. It's actually another storyboard file. As you can see, it's .storyboard. But this is the, again, a little self-explanatory. It's what the app actually launches with. So when an app launches, you'll notice a lot of times it's just black. The screen is just blank. But that doesn't have to be the case. It can actually launch with whatever you put here. Sorry, I don't know why I tapped that. It'll launch with whatever you put in this view controller right here. So that's really cool. The info plist file is just a bunch of stuff about your project. I guess, you really won't interact with it too much during development. You will eventually when you need to add things or that, but at least when you're starting out, you won't really need to mess with it too much. Cool, so let's go to the main.storyboard really quick, and let's get some other panels familiarized, or let's familiarize ourselves with another panel. So right here, this is a very important panel. This is one you're going to be using a lot. So there's several tabs here. We'll go through each one. So let's say we click on a view controller here, you can see it's blue, so it's highlighted. If you click on another view controller, by the way, this panel, the context of this panel changes. What I mean by that is, for example, you can see it says custom class view controller, right? When I have this view controller highlighted, but when I have this view controller highlighted, this part changes, which means the contents of this panel depend on which view controller I'm clicking on, right? Or I'm focused on. And how you can tell, again, if it's focused on is if it's glowing in blue. It also shows right here, okay? We'll cover this panel in a minute. But yeah, so this panel basically covers, let's start actually from the leftmost tab. So this leftmost tab is basic information about your view controller that you've highlighted, right? You don't really mess with this tab too much, so I won't spend too much time on it, but just know it's some information, some where it is in your computer and stuff like that. So this tab, it says not applicable right now. It's actually, if anyone that's watching this is familiar with Git, this is actually will show all the commits or the Git history related to this view controller or related to this file rather. So it's actually really cool if you're collaborating with other people. Super great. I'll do a dive into that in another video. But yeah. This question mark tab shows you a bunch of stuff about the documentation, or it shows you a bunch of documentation about whatever you clicked on. So, for example, you can see this one is about something about UI view controllers because we have one clicked and stuff like that. So that's pretty useful. And okay, so these last four, you'll be using quite a bit, these tabs. So I guess pay attention. So, this middle tab right here, I don't know what it looks like. It looks like maybe a flag. I don't know. Oh, I guess to show the identity inspector. Well, there's the actual name. In any case, this tab basically allows you to set the custom class for each view controller. So it's very important, right? So for example, when I click this view controller, you can see the custom class is view controller, right? When I click this one, it doesn't have one currently. It's just the UI view controller, the basic class, the one that comes with Xcode or whatever. So yeah, you can also set an ID for it, an identifier, a storyboard identifier. We will do that later. But those are the main two things right there. Adding a class to it and adding a storyboard ID. We'll do that later. But that's this tab, all right? So this next tab is very important, and you'll be dealing with this one a lot. So basically what it is so this rectangle here, this view controller, this is like a UI element, right? You'll have many of them. For example, I have this button here. This is another UI element. So you'll notice when I click the view controller, there's some things that I can change here, right? There's some things in this panel that I can, maybe select or whatever, right? So basically this panel, is all of your options. It holds all of the options you have for your UI element that you have highlighted. So for example, I'll go ahead and highlight this button right here. So watch what happens to this panel when I tap this button. When I tap this button, you'll see a bunch of stuff appears, and what this stuff is, like for example, the title, the text color, the image of the button, the background color, right? So this is how you configure any UI element. So for example, this is the title here, button. So I can change this to, this is my new button. And you'll see when I clicked enter, did I click enter? There you go. So you can see actually that the button, what's it called, title, changed to this is my new button. I can even add a new background color to this. So let's add this color. So yeah, that's how you do it. So basically this tab right here in this panel helps you configure the UI items that you are focused on, right? So this is super, super helpful right here. Alrighty. So next tab is right here, this ruler tab. And this one's a big one. We'll actually dive into this later because we're gonna cover constraints. I guess I'll do it when I'm making an app and I'll show you and I'll explain constraints to you guys. But constraints are basically things that say, they're basically relationships between UI elements or the UI elements and the screen. So for example, if I had a rectangle, right? I can just even do it. Let's say I had this rectangle. Let's change the background color really quick to just black. So let's say that I want this rectangle to be half the size of the screen, let's say width-wise, right? I could estimate that, but you know, if I run it on an iPhone 8 versus an iPhone 10, right, or an iPhone X, that's going to be, those are different widths and especially different heights, right? So so I really can't estimate it. I really can't estimate the height or the width or whatever the size of this rectangle if I want it to be half the width of every screen size out there, right? How do I do that? How do I make it so that it's dynamic? That if the screen size is super thin, then, or super non-wide, I don't know what that's called, but if it's not wide, then how do I make this, this rectangle super skinny? And if I make it, if I'm on like a huge device, maybe like an iPad, then how do I make it still half the size, which means a lot larger, right? How do I do that? The answer is constraints. And once we dive into that, you'll see it, but just know that this panel is all about constraints and basically managing your constraints or the constraints that you have on the element you've highlighted. So that's that. Alrighty. Oh, sorry, I was on the wrong tab. Not this one. This is the configure one. This one, the ruler, is the one that you're going to use to manage your constraints. And last but not least is this guy. So this tab is the tab you're going to use to connect the UI elements to the actual code. So I remember when I said that this, if we go to this tab right here, you can see that this class, viewController class, is attached or is assigned to this viewController, and that class is defined right here, right? So how do we connect this code to the actual UI? How do we make that connection, right? So how you do that, you're gonna do that through this tab right here, this arrow tab. And that's how you're gonna do that. So we'll dive into that later. Cool, so we've covered a lot so far. We've covered the view hierarchy right here, or the file hierarchy. We've covered this panel right here that lets you do a ton of stuff. Overall, the storyboard where you're going to see the UI elements and you're going to drag them. One more thing, actually, we'll cover this button right here. This plus button is going to be your best friend. It's how you actually drag stuff on. You might have seen me use it. So if I click on it, oh, some of it's actually crossed out. So if I click on it, you'll see we get this nice, this view here that then you can see label, button, whatever. There's a ton of stuff. So let's just say I want to grab a label, right? So how do I do that? Literally just grab it and drag it on. That's it. And you can like make it larger or whatever here. And then if you have it selected, which we do, you can edit it in this tab right here. So that's really cool. That will be a button they use all the time. And if you actually wanted to drag an image, let's say, that you dragged from the assets folder, right? Let's say I go to the assets folder, I imported something, remember import, and I import it. How do I drag it on to this view controller, right? How do I do that? Well, first, I highlight the view controller, I click the plus button, and I actually go to this tab right here. This little circle thing, it looks like, if anyone remembers, which I guess you could, it's not that long ago, home buttons used to look like this, right? Home buttons on iPhones used to look like this. This is where you get like all the UI elements from, but this tab is where you get your assets from. So right now we don't have any assets loaded, so there's some system assets you can see. But yeah, if you have these, you can basically highlight or choose them and drag them on. But that's how you do it. You'd also see all the images that you yourself imported into the project via assets. But excuse me. But yeah, that's how you do that. So we've covered that. If you're wondering, these three buttons just basically hide the different panels, and we will, I guess you can use that. This button right here is actually, it basically allows you to drag the UI or it basically allows you to connect the UI to the code. I never use it because I found there was a lot of bugs with it, so I never really use it. You can do that. You can do it just as well with this tab. So I wouldn't worry about that. Cool, so let's go on to a little bit about some of these tabs. I'm not gonna go through all of them because a lot of them you don't use, but in this panel, but I will go through all of them. So like we said, this is the file hierarchy, right? Right here, this is with Git stuff, again, with version control, you don't have to worry about that. I don't think I've ever used this file, maybe I should more, but basically just gives you like a layout of all your code that you have, or like a hierarchy of your code. Or like, your classes and stuff. I'd never use it. Anyways, search function, super, super useful. Literally searches for any kind of text in your file, or in your project, in your whole project. So it's super useful. So if I type in my name, you'll see there's a bunch of things, and if you tap on it, you'll go to it. Super, super useful. Over here, you'll see a bunch of this little triangle thing tab. You'll see a bunch of your what's it called, your warnings. And errors as well. So that's super useful when you actually have some. So actually, we can create one. We'll just do like that shouldn't. Yep, there you go. See, there's our new, what's it called, error. And yeah, so that's really useful just because when you have multiple files and stuff, and let's say we have an error right here, you can actually go to it, like here, over here, it'll take you to the error. So that's really useful. Cool. So this is for testing, this tab right here. We're not going to write any tests in this one, but if you ever needed to write tests, it'll be all right here. This one is for when you're running it in either your device or a simulator. And this is basically it'll show you a bunch of information, which is really cool. We'll get into that later. And right here is breakpoints. This is one that you'll use really heavily when actually debugging. You'll be using breakpoints a lot. I'll explain breakpoints in a later video. Initially, you don't really need them. But breakpoints are super, super useful. But this is where you do that. And lastly, this just shows you all of like your build history. So when you build or run your project, you'll see that. Okay, so now that we have that, we've covered our searching, we've covered our, actually, I don't know if I really mentioned it, but this main section is where all your code will be. I guess that was a little self-explanatory. But in any case, that's that. We got this one done. Let's cover a little bit about this guy right here. The difference between, I used to have this question all the time, but what's the difference between this filter and this search, right? The difference is this is going to be a text search throughout your entire project. This filter is filtering the results specifically from whatever is in this panel. So for example, I go to my files and let's type in, like, let's say I want to find out my delegate, or which files have the word or the letters DELE in it. I would type in DELE and they pop up right here. So it filters what is inside of this panel, nothing else. So that is that. Alrighty, so let's go on to probably one of the most important things is right here, this upper left corner. So quick thing, right? To build, there's two vocab words you'd want to know, build and run. To run something or to run a project means to run it on a device, as in to literally package everything up and put it onto either a simulator, which is a fake device, or a real device like an iPhone. And that's what running is. Okay, this is the play button. Okay. On the other hand, there's another action called building, and it basically just means package everything up and act like you're going to run it, but don't actually run it on any device. Why ever build anything? Well, when you build something, many times you just want to check if there are any errors or anything like that. So you build it, you build a project, but many times you want to run it all the way through, so you just run it. So to run something, you do this button right here, the play button. To build something, you would do Command B to build it. Alrighty. So let's keep going. Next here is this drop down. This is where you manage your schemes, or where you can access your different schemes. We're not going to worry about this initially. It's not really a concern for now. So we're going to skip through that. But right here on this side is very important. This is where you select the device that you're going to install or run this app on. So really cool if you actually have a device like plugged in via like a lightning cable or whatever. You can actually run it on your your cell phone or your iPhone. But if you don't, you can use a simulator. The simulators are like top notch. They absolutely do a fantastic job of emulating what it's going to be like on a real phone. There are limitations, but quite few. There aren't that many limitations. So we'll do it, right? So let's click the iPhone 11 Pro Max, and let's click Run, and it'll run our application. So you can see it says launching Xcode intro, and it'll actually run and show up. It's somewhere here. Oh, here it is. So this is the intro. And yeah, so you can see our app, it's right here. That's looking really cool. So it might be blank and you might be thinking, oh wait, why is that? I thought we put some buttons and stuff. That's true, let's see. Oh, there it is, just took a long time to load, I guess. But yeah, you'll see all the stuff we added. You'll see our button, we can tap it and stuff. But yeah, this is pretty much it. This is how you run stuff. So if you make changes, let's say we go back to main.storyboard, and let's say we take away this stuff. We just leave this guy on here. Let's put it in the center. Let's run again. You'll see that this guy updated, right? The view updated. So that's really cool. And when you make apps, you'll be constantly testing it, running it on the simulator. And then, of course, if you want the device as well. Or it's very recommended to do it on the device. But cool. That's that. That is that. And that is pretty much it. That's a good intro of it. Actually, last thing, I guess a bonus would be this panel right here. So what happens is, I guess this bottom panel in general, so we'll use this button to expand it. So what happens is, when you want to, remember when we talked about constraints? When you want to make constraints, you'll do it from here, from this drop down, and stuff like that. So this is really for constraints, we'll dive into that later. But you might see this little panel and this panel. This is a lot of, when you're actually coding, you can print stuff out. So I'll do a quick demo right here. So in our view controller, I'm just going to do print hello world, right? And when we run this print statement literally prints it to the console, if you've heard that term before. And this is the console, right? It says hello world, it shows me all my print stuff. If there's any errors, it will also show those here. So stuff like that, or if any constraint errors or runtime errors or whatever, it'll show them all here. So this is important. This panel right here on this side will show you, if you have variables and stuff, it'll show you, you can dive into them, it'll show you information about that. Very useful at times, sometimes not that useful. In any case, that is there. But that pretty much wraps up the Xcode tour. So I hope you guys found this really useful. I'll be putting out more videos explaining stuff like this, and mainly I think I get my inspiration from the videos I wish I had, but eventually that will end. So I'll start making app videos too, just like the name of the channel suggests. But yeah, I hope you guys found this useful. Thank you so much, and I will see you guys in the next one.